Hey guys, Cam here from today's iPhone.com, and I have this with the HTC One and this, the iPhone 5, and I'm going to compare them against each other. Now obviously you're going to know I run an iPhone site, so therefore I'm probably going to like this more, but I do like to compare phones and I like to see whether or not there's a manufacturer out there who can come close to matching what I've come to expect from Apple. And HTC's latest HTC One is probably the closest thing to it. So I wanted to compare them, I wanted to show you them and see what they were like, and maybe show perhaps how the iPhone can change and how Apple could think differently and do things a little bit differently. But anyway, this is the HTC One, this is the iPhone 5, let's see how they compare. So let's talk design, form factor, how it feels in your hand first. Now that's obviously the first thing you're going to notice. The iPhone is clearly smaller than the HTC One, which is about 2mm thicker, 5mm wider and 15mm taller than the iPhone, but then obviously that's because it's got a huge display and a big battery in there as well. Now in terms of looks, obviously the iPhone itself is all glass and aluminium. It hasn't got any plastic on it, except perhaps for the tiny little gaps in between the antenna all around the edges. Now the HTC One is virtually all metal and glass as well. Obviously I've said it's a unibody aluminium phone. Everything's been carved out of one piece of aluminium, but it does have some polycarbonate banding around the sides and also some slim bands in the back for your antenna. Overall, in terms of looks, I think the iPhone looks better. Despite its huge size, the HTC One does feel really great in hand, and that's mostly because it's got super slim edges, and also the really gently curved back means it does feel really natural in your hand. It doesn't feel like a big square brick that you'd expect from a device with a 4.7-inch display. But in terms of looks, I think it's slightly less attractive than the iPhone, and I guess it's a compromise they've made because these huge machine grilled panels on the side of the display for the boom sound. They obviously thought sound over looks, and it's a compromise I think I'm happy with. Now on the back you've got on the HTC One, the camera is pretty much front and center right in the middle of the back, whereas the iPhone tends to always have it in the top left hand corner in the top glass panel. That will make a difference with your photos, but it just means you have to kind of change the way you take your photo, I guess. Now one thing I did notice with the HTC One, and it's not a big deal, I mentioned it in my review for Timo News, is that when they've clearly gone for fit and finish here, they've gone for build quality, they've gone for design, and to that extent they've almost succeeded, but there are a couple of little areas where they haven't shown the same amount of precision as what you would get from Apple. If you look around the edges sometimes where the polycarbonate framing kind of meets the metal, there is a tiny, almost not microscopic, you can feel it, there is a gap there is a kind of a ridge, and it's not quite flush with the edge of the device. And although it's not going to affect your day-to-day use, it's something that HTC will have to look at if it really wants to compete with companies like Apple, who are notoriously perfectionist when it comes to building their phones. Obviously the workers at Foxconn have said how difficult it is to make one of these. And it is virtually perfect in the way that it's all fit together in every way. There's no unevenness, there's no gaps, it just all feels fantastic. So let's move on to display. Obviously on this one we have a 4-inch display with the Retina branding, which means it's got 326 pixels per inch. This one is a full HD 1920 by 1080p display. It's 4.7 inches, so it's got a huge pixel density of about 470 pixels per inch. It is really sharp, but because you're kind of at the threshold with the iPhone already in terms of sharpness, you can't really tell that much difference between them. But because of its size, it does mean that watching media, videos, viewing photographs and everything, it's a lot better experience on the HTC One. What you'll also find is that there's obviously things like viewing angles to consider. When you look at the HTC One from virtually any angle, whether it be from 90 to 180 degrees, you're not going to notice that much discoloration or fade. You'll still get good visibility of what's on your screen. The iPhone is very similar. They both use LCD technology, similar IPS display panels in there, but obviously the iPhone's with a touchscreen has got all the touchscreen cells actually built into the pixels of the display. So that makes the display panel thinner, and that's possibly why the iPhone has made it so thin. Now obviously a display is there to be looked at. Now the best display I think is the one on the HTC One. And that's purely helped by its size and obviously the quality of the pixels and the quality of the LCD panel that they've put in there means that everything is fantastic. The contrast is good, it's very immersive. And when you consider the sound quality that's in there as well with these boom sound speakers, it means that when you're playing games like Real Racing 3 or watching movies on Netflix, everything is a lot more immersive than anything you've experienced on a phone before. If we move on to camera, now obviously on the camera front we've got an 8 megapixel backside illuminated sensor on the iPhone 5. On the HTC One they went completely against the grain and went with a 4 megapixel ultra pixel camera, which has less pixels, but all the pixels that are in the sensor can apparently gain 300 times more light, or 300% more light, so 3 times more light. Now I've noticed in day-to-day shots in daylight it does produce good results, and with some extra features in there like Zoe's sequence shot and HDR video filming at 1080p resolution, it does offer a lot on the HTC One. And obviously at night time as well you'll find that actually the HTC One will give you better results in low light, but I found that in general when it comes to taking pictures in good light outdoors, I found that the iPhone was better at a few other things, like it was better at focusing on things close up. I found I struggled sometimes with the HTC One to manually focus. And also with the iPhone 5 I found a lot of the images were sharper, they had a little bit more depth. HTC One sometimes tends to bring in too much light even when you don't need it. And that often gives you a sense of having a washed out image or a faded image, and something that can be quite difficult to fix in the editing afterwards. It's here and there. I mean, there are apps you can get for the iPhone that you can do the same similar things that the features built into the HTC One can do, and they won't cost you much, if anything at all. So in terms of quality of image, in daylight I would go with the iPhone, in low light I would go with the HTC One. I don't think there's a clear winner here because both of them are great.